Welcome back to the channel. Today's case is one that you've surely heard of, especially lately since her trial just took place. We're going to be talking about Lori Vallow Daybell, also known as the Doomsday Mother. She became infamous when everybody started disappearing and dying around her in very suspicious ways. So far, 5 people have died that were in her circle, and we could maybe even branch out further and make a little mind note that another of her former husbands also died abruptly in a suspicious way. Although we won't be talking about that one too much because it wasn't considered to be foul play at the time, so there hasn't been a real investigation on it. We'll just mention in passing that Lori has accused this man of abusing her son Colby. They divorced, and during the custody battle, Lori's brother Alex tasered this guy. He got probation for it. And as for Lori, she said in a podcast that this is when she started looking more and more into her faith, and that it was either that or she was going to commit murder. Her words, not mine. Amongst the people that happened to have died around her were her 2 children, Joshua Jackson Vallow, or JJ Vallow, Tylee Ryan, her 16-year-old daughter, and her husband at the time, Charles Vallow. Later on, her lover Chad Daybell's wife Tammy Daybell as well. Then her brother Alex Cox. Oh, and let's not forget that her niece's husband, Brandon Boudreaux, was also shot, even though he survived thankfully, but the shot came from a vehicle registered to Charles Vallow weeks after his death. But more on that later. Already, one can get an idea of what this story is going to be about, right? 2 lovers wanting to get rid of their families to get together, and of course, money is going to be of interest. Classic at this point, isn't it? But no, you have no idea the level of what in the world you're about to dive into with these people. It is wild. Some compare this case to the Casey Anthony case in some ways. I figure it's mostly the non-emotional, downright psychopathic behavior of a mother and a wife towards her supposed loved ones that stood out to people, really. I also found somewhat of a resemblance to the bad vegan woman in that Netflix documentary. However, nobody died around her, so it's just the brainwashing aspect of it that struck me as similar. But yeah, you let me know what you think in the comments. Now, let's just get into the story. Lori Vallow was living in Arizona with her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, her 16-year-old daughter, Tylee Ryan, from her previous husband, Joseph Ryan, the one who died in 2018 from natural causes, according to the Phoenix police, and their adoptive son, JJ Vallow, who was in fact the biological son of Charles's sister's son, making JJ Charles's biological grandnephew. Lori's first son, Colby, was old enough that he'd met the love of his life and moved out of the house by the time things started getting weird. Anyways, all was well. The family unit seemed solid. They were members of the LDS church. They had a community, friends, a family around them, and to anyone and everyone that they knew, they were a normal American family. And Lori was a great mother, caring and protective of her children. But Lori started reading and enjoying the books of a certain Chad Daybell, which were about the end of the world, near-death experiences, spiritual awakenings, supposedly fictional. And she would soon start attending conferences and seminars by preparing a people, all about preparing for the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus Christ and whatnot. She started stocking food supplies like preppers do, you know, but there was this religious aspect of it where they believed that 144,000 people would be chosen to survive this end of the world and carry on with a mission given to them by Jesus Christ himself, or something to that effect. And I think this Chad guy was giving speeches within some of these conferences, amongst other gatherings of this type. He was mainly there to promote his books, talk about his alleged near-death experiences, and how he was given the gift of seeing into the future, of knowing things that Jesus himself would tell him. Most people would consider him cuckoo, you know, but he was preaching in places where people were already more inclined to believe his stuff, and he certainly attached himself to the be more vulnerable amongst them, the ones that he would more easily be able to manipulate, for instance. Amongst these were mostly women, and he had a thing for pretty women in particular. So anyways, Lori met Melanie Gibb at one of these conferences and reached out to her to become her friend. From then on, they became very close and would often talk about religion and their beliefs. They would attend these gatherings together, and Melanie, who had met Chad a year prior, sort of introduced them at some point. Or at least she was there the day that they both met. She said in an interview that she saw there was a mutual attraction there from the start between them. They also started discussing topics that one would not typically discuss in public, more controversial things surrounding their beliefs and past lives, or past probations as they would call them. And in fact, on the very first day that they met, Chad told Lori they had been married multiple times in past lives. He later convinced her that she was a goddess, that Jesus had a special plan for her, that she and he together would become the leaders of the 144,000, and that they had to carry out this mission to get everything ready for the day of the second coming. So they started seeing more and more of each other and eventually started having an affair. Melanie, who was often privy to their discussions and who Lori confided in, said that Chad had started referring to people as light and dark, that he had Lori believe that evil spirits sort of took over people's bodies and made it so they weren't themselves anymore. And from then on, the only solution for these people was for the evil spirits to be casted out of them, but in a way that the bodies they had entered would not survive the castings, apparently, which is something that Melanie didn't realize at first but came to understand in time. Lori, however, seems to know that, since it was revealed through text message exchanges between her and Chad that he had this sort of scale with which he measured the life percentages of people that he deemed to be possessed or whatever. So according to his scale, ranging from 0 to 10, when a person's life percentage would come down to 0, they were about ready to die, basically. I know it's a lot of woo-woo stuff. Anyways, he had Lori believe this, or at least she acted as though she did in their text conversations, because it shows them talking about the life percentages of the people that were closest to them, like Tammy, Chad's wife, or Lori's husband Charles, and Lori's kids, JJ and Tylee, who were considered by Chad to be dark amongst others. It just so happens coincidentally that the people that he considered to be dark were the ones that were in the way of his own personal dreams of happiness with just Lori by his side. Same goes for her. Either she really believed his spiel, or she too dreamed of a teenage romance in Hawaii, kids and husband free. She even started to refer to her kids as zombies. But if that was the case, why not just divorce Charles? Give custody of JJ to his grandparents that were more than willing to care for him, and place Tylee with her sister or her mother. I mean, there were solutions to her selfish pursuit of a teenage romance with this guy, and their plans of ruling the afterworld together, if that was what she was really after, right? By the time Charles found out about her affair and her beliefs of him being possessed by a demon that they called Ned Schneider, after having received death threats from his own wife, he wanted a divorce. So she could have had it. He even called the police and had her checked out because he thought she was losing her mind and might become a danger to their kids as well. Right, he was, but the police didn't take it seriously and nothing came out of this. Lori didn't want a divorce. Chad didn't want a divorce. But why? The answer is simple. As per usual. And you know it. Money. As Lori's defense lawyer even pointed out in his closing arguments, Charles made way more money than Chad, like way more. And he had $1 million life insurance for which she, as far as she knew, was the beneficiary. Chad's wife, Tammy, also had a life insurance policy. If they were to make them disappear, they could cash in and partially finance their luxurious dream honeymoon in Hawaii and then some. How did they justify not wanting to get a divorce? Religion, of course. Just say you aren't allowed and people won't ask further questions. So the first to go was Charles, who was shot dead by Alex Cox, Lori's brother, whom she had an exacerbated amount of influence over, to the point of him doing almost whatever she asked of him. So she asked him to come over to her apartment, telling him that Charles was going to kill her or something to that effect. And since Chad and her had already brainwashed him into thinking that he was to be her protector, that this was his mission in life, assigned to him by their savior in person, he went to her house with a gun. And the next morning, when Charles came to pick up JJ for school, Lori picked a fight with him over text messages she had seen on his phone allegedly, and they screamed at each other, which woke up Tylee, who came out with a bat, and Alex, of course, who waited until Tylee and Lori and JJ were out of the house to then take out his gun and shoot Charles twice. The second time when he was already lying on the floor. He called the police and told them that Charles had hit him with the bat and that he'd told him to stop, but that he wouldn't, and so he'd gone to his room to pick up his gun while Charles was apparently patiently waiting in the living room to pick up the fight where they'd left off, and then when he came back out, he shot him twice in self-defense, allegedly. Initially, since Tylee and Lori told the story of Charles having been very aggressive, the police believed their story and ruled it a self-defense thing, a ruling which has since been put into doubt given the events that would follow. So merely a couple of weeks after Charles's death, in September 2019, Lori picked up and moved with the kids from Chandler, Arizona to Rexburg, Idaho, close to where Chad Daybell and his family lived, and far from every family member and friend she and the kids had. By the end of that month, both JJ and Tylee mysteriously disappeared. Concerns grew when Lori failed to provide information about the children's whereabouts and gave inconsistent and evasive answers to everyone who asked. Kay, Charles' sister, was asking to connect with JJ, her grandson, on the regular, but Lori would just ignore her. So eventually, when Kay found out Lori's new address through Amazon delivery status notifications on Charles' computer that she had recuperated upon his death, she asked for a welfare check to be made on JJ by the police, and that's when the shit really hit the fan for Lori. But let's rewind for a bit. From September to January, Lori was just ignoring Kay and telling people that Tylee was in college and that JJ was with a friend of hers, Melanie Gibb. That is, when she was answering them at all. Melanie, whom she had told JJ was with his grandmother, started to suspect something was off. And a few weeks after she was contacted by the police for JJ's welfare check, she confessed to them that Lori had lied and that JJ was in fact not with her. Within those 4 to 5 months, a lot happened. Lori, who had expressed how disappointed she was at the realization that Charles had changed his life insurance beneficiary from her to his sister, she said it was like a spear through her heart, in fact, I believe, made sure to change her daughter's social security money transfers that she was entitled to monthly as a survivor of her father's death from her daughter's account to her own account. She did that before her daughter's mysterious disappearance and kept receiving those social security payments well after Tylee was no longer with her, and surely well after she knew that her daughter was no longer alive. So that's almost $2,000 monthly there. JJ was entitled to social security money for surviving his father's death as well. Money which, once again, she kept receiving from the moment they disappeared in September up until she got arrested. So that's another almost $2,000 monthly. She kept inquiring with Chad on his wife's life percentage, asking when it would get to 0. She did that with JJ as well, by the way, before he went missing. All of this can be seen in their extensive text message exchanges. So she was eager for Tammy's percentage to get to 0, and her internet search history shows that she was already looking for a wedding dress, a wedding ring, etc. before Tammy actually turned up dead. On October 19th, 2019, in the middle of the night, Tammy Daybell died. Initially, it was ruled a death of natural cause because Chad's children didn't want an autopsy, and he had been telling them that she had a declining health. In court recently, her neighbors testified that she didn't seem to have any health issues. In fact, after Lori and Chad started getting attention for the disappearance of the children, Tammy's body was exhumed and an autopsy was performed, where they found that she had no health issues, at the time of her death at least, and that the cause of her death was asphyxiation. His children are still convinced that he didn't cause her death, and he hasn't had his trial yet, so I won't go further on that. Nonetheless, right after her death, he moved out of his house where 2 of his 5 children still lived and practically cut ties with them, although they were grieving their mother and having a hard time overcoming their sorrow. Their neighbors seemed to show more attention to the kids than he did. He moved to Lori's condo, then went to Hawaii with her, where they got married, I think 3 weeks after Tammy's death, and they honeymooned for about 4 months in Hawaii until Lori was arrested and they had to come back. He had even told his neighbors he was happier than ever. He had taken her to their house one night. They were both acting like teenagers on their couch right in front of them, and only weeks after his wife of over 20 years had passed away. Anyways, after Lori got arrested, he asked his neighbors, the same ones, if he could rent a room in their house. They said that one of their kids was coming back to live with them, so that this was a no, and then he asked them if they could put their house on the line to post Lori's bail. They're super nice because they said they'd think about it. I'd have said, are you out of your mind? But he even called a bondsperson and told them he'd arranged a meeting with them for their house and the bail, or something to that effect, and the neighbors said, we said we'd think about it. That's how pressing he was. When the neighbors asked him, what about Lori's daughter? Where is she? Because by then the neighbor knew that Lori's daughter had been missing and that she was a teenager. He answered, she didn't like people. And she didn't like me. Him speaking in the past tense, when at the time they were still just missing, was something that the neighbor didn't forget. On December 12th, 2019, Alex Cox died. The report indicates Cox died of blood clots wedged into his arteries and lungs, as well as high blood pressure. So, natural cause, apparently, but interesting timing. So Lori gets summoned to produce the kids within 5 days by the court as she is sitting by the pool with Chad by her side in Hawaii. She is looking totally unbothered, by the way, and of course she can't produce the kids, so she doesn't, and that's how she gets arrested. After Alex's death, his cell phone was taken by the police, and not only did they get access to all of his conversations, vocals, and written text with Lori and Chad, but they were also able to track his whereabouts, and what they found out was crucial to this case. His phone records placed him in Chad Daybell's backyard for hours around the dates where the children disappeared.
Do you need something?
Any questions?
You have any questions for that?
Calls were placed to Chad and Lori as he was driving there and afterwards. This is what prompted the police to get the search warrant needed to search Chad's backyard for the remains of the children, and that is precisely where they found them. So I'm just gonna say that JJ was found buried in a shallow grave wrapped in plastic bags and duct tape. He'd been suffocated. Tylee had been dismembered and partially burned. She'd been buried in the Daybell family pet cemetery, as mentioned in one of Chad's text messages to his late wife, where he refers to her as a raccoon, quote unquote, that he'd allegedly shot and buried there. He adds, quote unquote, fun times. His internet browsing history shows him searching for the direction that the wind is going to blow in on the day where he is to burn the limbs and the stuff in the garden, allegedly. Chad, who at this time was still out and who'd been watching the police dig in his garden, as he said on a phone call with Lori, who was at the time in jail. When he saw that they had found something, he got in his car and tried to flee, but the police caught up with him and he was arrested as well, just as they had found the human remains in his yard. Lori and Chad remained in jail while waiting for their respective trial. Lori was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for her 2 children children. So for each of them, as well as for conspiracy to commit murder for Tammy Daybell, and separately in Arizona, conspiracy to commit murder for Charles Vallow, her late husband. But that was not in this trial. This is going to be tried in Arizona. She also faces charges for grand theft for having collected Social Security money on behalf of her children after they had died. Chad was also charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the children as well as for his late wife, Tammy. The charges against him also include conspiracy to commit grand theft by deception for the insurance money, I guess, he received when Tammy died. By the way, I didn't touch on that, but yes, he did collect her insurance money, and when he and Lori married, she was able to benefit from that money as well. In fact, that's how they paid for their $6,000 a month seafront honeymoon townhouse in Hawaii, where they were living it up well they could. Now, Lori's trial has taken place. It lasted 6 weeks, and astonishingly, the defense didn't call any witnesses to make their case. They thought it would be enough to say that they deemed the prosecution hadn't provided enough evidence for there to be no place left for reasonable doubt. And they only talked numbers in their closing arguments, where the lawyer made a point to say how it would be illogical, according to him, for Lori to leave successful, wealthy, and fit Charles for poor loser, weirdo, unfit Chad. Those are his words, by the way. Well, not really his words, but that's the gist of it. He argued that she had been brainwashed by Chad and that she didn't even know what Chad and Alex had done to her kids, as she was physically not there. Okay, he makes a few points where he literally says that she downgraded when she went from Charles to Chad, but he omits a lot of damning evidence in her texts that very much make her look guilty. Now, unless she was completely brainwashed, and I don't understand how that works personally, she seems pretty guilty. I mean, some people have been brainwashed enough to themselves on the orders of their cult leaders, and the way that Lori still talked while in jail with her son over the phone as though she did nothing wrong. She kept saying he would see one day and that she had her savior on her side. It seems as though she really believes it all. Her former good friend Melanie Gibb has her doubts on whether or not she really believes it. I guess we won't really know. Will she ever snap out of it? At the end, she was found guilty on all charges against her, and her sentence will be known within 3 to 4 months. That's what the judge estimated, but she will not be sentenced to death. And I just want to point out a few things that I specifically thought showed her true colors. First, these text messages. She asks Chad, isn't it at 0, regarding the life percentage of his wife Tammy and JJ. So she's pretty much eager for it to get to 0. Or in this text message exchange, where he asks if she wants him to inflict pain, and she basically says, well, we'll see how it goes, and worst comes to worst, we'll zap them. There's no words. There's a moment where she says that, referring to Alex, that he can't do anything right. That alludes to the time where he shoots at Tammy, but he misses. So this is the first time prior to her death where she was shot at, but the guy missed. And there's that final one where Audrey, her former friend, testified that she was threatened by Lori, that Lori told her, I'll kill you. I'm not in the headspace to do it right now, but I can get myself to be in that headspace. And she told her as well something about it being really messy, there being a lot of blood, a lot of cleanup to do, and then plastic bags and whatnot. And it very much resembled the circumstances in which JJ was found, and also what happened to Tylee and the plastic bags. You know how they found her. It almost makes it seem as though Lori was indeed, if not part of the kill, part of the, disposing of the bodies, if you will. It doesn't make her look good anyways. For her to have talked about committing murder ever since she was with her third husband, for her to have also threatened Charles to kill him, and then Audrey, and then given how emotionless she's been when it comes to her children, I'm pretty sure she could very well have actively been involved in the dirty work as well. But she's definitely conspired. Chad Daybell's trial date is still unknown, but he has pleaded not guilty so far to all charges against him, and he may get the death penalty if he's found guilty. Please subscribe if you haven't already. That would be greatly appreciated, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.